The fence post splintered under Caleb Walker's hammer just as the woman collapsed at his property line. He'd spent 3 years building walls between himself and the world, walls of barbed wire, silence, and reputation. Now a stranger knelt in his dust with a half-starved child clinging to her skirts, and everything he'd constructed to keep people out was about to come down. She didn't beg. She didn't cry. She simply looked up at him with eyes that had seen too much and said 5 words that would destroy his carefully ordered life. I can work for bread. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story of redemption and second chances travels. And if this story moves you, hit that like button and stay until the end. You won't regret it. The Wyoming summer hit like a furnace even as the sun began its descent. Caleb Walker had been working the fence line since dawn, replacing posts the winter had heaved out of true. Sweat darkened his shirt between his shoulder blades, and dust coated his forearms where he'd rolled up his sleeves. The rhythmic strike of hammer against wood had become meditation, each blow driving away thought, leaving only the clean simplicity of physical labor. He preferred it that way. 3 years since he'd returned from the war, 3 years since he'd buried his brother. 3 years of choosing silence over conversation, solitude over community, the company of cattle over the complications of people. The fence represented everything he valued now: clear boundaries, honest work, something solid he could maintain through sheer discipline and sweat. Then he saw them. 2 figures wavered in the heat shimmer where his property met the county road. At first, Caleb thought the sun was playing tricks. Mirages weren't uncommon this time of year. But the shape solidified as he straightened, one hand shading his eyes. A woman. And a child. They weren't walking anymore. The woman had sunk to her knees in the dust, one arm wrapped around a girl who couldn't have been more than 6 or 7. Even from 50 yards away, Caleb could see the way the child sagged against her mother, could read exhaustion in every line of their bodies. He should have ignored them, should have returned to his fence, his solitude, his carefully constructed isolation. The town was only 3 miles down the road. They could make it that far. Someone else could deal with whatever trouble had brought them to the edge of his land. But something in the woman's posture stopped him. She wasn't sprawled in defeat. Even kneeling in the dirt, she held herself with a dignity that seemed impossible given her obvious circumstances. Her dress was patched, but clean. Her hair, though loosened from its pins by travel, had been carefully braided that morning. Caleb set down his hammer. The walk across his own property felt longer than it should have. With each step, he became more aware of details that made his chest tighten. The child's dress hung loose on a frame that should have carried more weight. The woman's boots were held together with wire. A single cloth bag lay in the dust beside them, everything they owned, probably. He stopped 10 feet away, suddenly uncertain. Up close, he could see the woman was younger than her weariness suggested, maybe 25, though hardship had written lines around her eyes that didn't belong there. The child pressed against her side had blonde hair matted with dust, and wide blue eyes that tracked his every movement with the wariness of a creature that had learned humans could be dangerous. "Ma'am?" His voice came out rougher than he'd intended. He'd gone days without speaking to anyone. The woman lifted her chin. Her eyes were gray, he noticed, the color of winter clouds before snow. "Sir, I apologize for trespassing. My daughter needed to rest." Caleb heard the South in her accent. Virginia or Carolina, refined and educated beneath the exhaustion. Whatever had brought her to this dusty corner of Wyoming, she'd traveled a long way from home. "You're not trespassing. Road's public until you cross the fence." He gestured at the barbed wire 20 feet behind them. "You headed to town?" "We were." She said it simply, without elaboration. "Long walk in this heat." "We've walked farther." Something in the way she said it, flat, factual, without self-pity, made Caleb's jaw tighten. He glanced at the child again. The girl's lips were cracked, her face flushed with more than just sunburn. "When did you last eat?" The woman's spine stiffened. "We're managing." "That wasn't what I asked." For a long moment, they stared at each other. Caleb watched pride war with desperation in her eyes. Pride won. "Yesterday morning." The admission seemed to cost her. "But we don't need charity. I'm offering work." She straightened further, despite the obvious effort it took. I can clean, cook, mend, do laundry, whatever needs doing. All I'm asking is food for my daughter and a place to sleep tonight. We'll move on tomorrow. Caleb had heard plenty of desperate offers in his 32 years, heard people beg, promise anything, debase themselves for survival. This wasn't that. This woman wasn't begging, she was negotiating. Even at the absolute end of her resources, she insisted on maintaining her dignity by offering fair exchange. It would have been easier if she'd just asked for help. Can you stand? She nodded, but when she tried to rise, her legs buckled. Caleb moved without thinking, catching her elbow. She flinched at the contact, but didn't pull away. The child made a small sound of fear. It's all right, Molly. The woman's voice softened for the first time. The gentleman's just helping Mama up. Molly. The child had a name now, which somehow made everything worse. Caleb steadied the woman until she found her feet, then stepped back immediately. How long since you had water? We finished our canteen this morning. No food since yesterday, no water since morning, walking in heat that could kill a healthy man. He looked at the child again, saw the dangerous flush in her cheeks, the glassy quality in her eyes. My house is a quarter mile that way. He pointed across his land toward the cluster of buildings barely visible in the distance. I've got a well, food, spare room. You can rest there. I said I don't need charity, but her voice wavered. Then you'll work for it. Tomorrow. Tonight you'll eat and sleep because I'm not spending my evening burying a child who died on my property. The harshness in his tone surprised even him. I've buried enough people. Something flickered across her face, recognition of shared grief maybe. She looked down at Molly, and Caleb watched the last of her resistance crumble. Just tonight, she said quietly, and I'll work to earn it. Fine. He retrieved the cloth bag from the dust. It weighed almost nothing. He gestured toward his land. Can you walk or do I need to bring the wagon? The woman drew herself up with visible effort. I can walk. She couldn't, not really. Within 50 yards, she was leaning heavily on his arm, and the child was stumbling every few steps. Caleb stopped, set down the bag, and crouched in front of Molly. I'm going to carry you, all right? The girl looked at her mother, who nodded. Molly came to him slowly, and when he lifted her, she weighed frighteningly little. She smelled like dust and sweat and childhood, a scent that brought memories he'd spent 3 years trying to forget. His brother's children, the niece and nephew he'd never meet now. He pushed the thought away and started walking, moderating his pace for the woman beside him. I'm Lydia, she said after a long silence. Lydia Hale. This is my daughter, Molly. Caleb Walker. I run cattle, mostly. It's a beautiful ranch. He glanced at her in surprise. They could barely see the buildings yet. You can tell that from here? The fence is well maintained. The land is cared for. That tells me everything I need to know about the man who owns it. The observation caught him off guard. When was the last time anyone had looked at his work and understood what it meant? The discipline, the attention to detail, the quiet pride he took in doing things right, even when no one was watching. They walked in silence after that, Caleb adjusting his stride each time Lydia stumbled. The sun sank lower, painting the grasslands gold and amber. Molly's head grew heavy against his shoulder. She'd fallen asleep, surrendering to exhaustion now that someone else carried the burden. His ranch buildings emerged from the landscape, a solid 2-story house, barn, stable, bunkhouse, all arranged with the same careful precision as his fence lines. The well stood in the yard between house and barn, its pump handle gleaming where he'd replaced the leather washers last week. Set her in the shade, Lydia said when they reached the well. I'll draw water. You can barely stand. I can pump water. She said it with such finality that Caleb didn't argue. He carried Molly to the porch and settled her on the bench there, in the long shadow cast by the house. The child's breathing was too fast, her skin too hot. Behind him, the well pump creaked. He turned to see Lydia working the handle with methodical determination, filling the bucket despite the way her hands shook. When it was full, she carried it to the porch. Carried it, refusing to drag it, maintaining that stubborn dignity even now. She knelt beside Molly and wet her handkerchief, pressing it to the child's forehead, her neck, her wrists. The tenderness in the gesture made Caleb's throat tight. She'll be all right, Lydia said, though whether to Caleb or herself, he couldn't tell. She just needs rest and food and... Her voice broke. She turned away quickly, but not before Caleb saw tears cut tracks through the dust on her face. He went into the house, into the kitchen that had stood empty except for him since he'd fired his housekeeper 6 months ago. The woman had talked too much, asked too many questions, tried to manage his life. He'd decided he preferred doing for himself. Now, looking at his bare cupboards and simple provisions, he wondered if he'd been preparing for exactly this, for the moment when someone needed something from him that wasn't conversation or companionship, but simple sustenance. He built up the fire in the stove, sliced bread from the loaf he'd bought in town 3 days ago, found cheese and dried apples. He filled a pitcher with water and added a small amount of sugar, his mother's remedy for dehydration. His hands remembered the motions, even though she'd been dead 15 years. When he returned to the porch, Lydia had revived Molly enough to sit up, the child's eyes fixed on the tray with an intensity that hurt to see. "Eat slowly," Caleb said, setting the tray on the bench between them. "If you eat too fast after going without, you'll get sick." Lydia nodded. She tore the bread into small pieces, giving them to Molly one at a time, making her drink water between each bite. Caleb watched the child eat with the single-minded focus of starvation barely held at bay, watched Lydia portion out the food with mathematical precision. 2 bites for Molly, 1 for herself, water for both. Repeat. It took 20 minutes for them to finish half the bread and cheese. Caleb waited until Lydia finally relaxed slightly before speaking. "When did you eat last, really?" She looked away. 3 days ago, in North Platte. That's 200 miles. We got rides on freight wagons, most of the way. And the rest? We walked. 200 miles. A woman and child with 1 bag and nothing else, walking across open country in summer heat. Caleb had seen strong men die attempting less. "What are you running from?" Lydia's head snapped up, and for the first time he saw real fear in her eyes. "What makes you think we're running?" "Because no one walks 200 miles with a child unless they're desperate. And you don't have the look of desperation. You have the look of purpose. That means you're not running toward something. You're running away." She held his gaze for a long moment. Around them, the evening settled into that particular stillness of prairie twilight. The wind dying, the heat finally releasing its grip, the first stars beginning to appear in a sky that stretched impossibly wide. "My husband died," she said finally. 6 months ago. Yellow fever. I'm sorry." "Don't be. He was..." She glanced at Molly, choosing her words carefully. "He was not a kind man. When he died, his brother came. Said the house was his now. Said I could stay if I..." Again, that careful pause. "I couldn't, so we left." The flat delivery told Caleb everything she wasn't saying. He'd heard enough stories during the war, seen enough of what men did to vulnerable women, to understand exactly what choice Lydia had faced. "You have people in Cedar Ridge?" "No, I heard it was a growing town. Knew enough that maybe no one would ask too many questions about a widow and her daughter looking for honest work." "What kind of work?" "Anything. Laundry, mending, housekeeping. I can read and write. I could teach, if anyone would have me. Before I married, I was a school teacher in Richmond." Caleb processed this. A educated Southern woman, widowed, running from her dead husband's family with nothing but a child and her pride. Coming to a town where she knew no one, hoping for work in a place where women's options were limited and a widow traveling alone would face instant suspicion. "You'll never make it to town tonight," he said. "I know. That's why I asked for just 1 night." "1 night won't fix what's wrong with your daughter." Lydia stiffened. "There's nothing wrong with Molly. She's malnourished and dehydrated. She needs more than 1 meal and 1 night's sleep. She needs a week, at least, maybe 2. "I can't impose on you for 2 weeks. "You're not imposing. You're working." Caleb stood abruptly, needing to move, to think. "I've been doing everything myself since I fired my housekeeper. Place is falling apart. Laundry's piled up. Clothes need mending. House needs proper cleaning. You work that off, and Molly eats and rests until she's strong enough to travel. Fair exchange." "Why?" Lydia's voice was almost a whisper. "Why would you do that for strangers?" Caleb looked at her, really looked at her. saw past the exhaustion and fear to the woman who'd walked 200 miles rather than surrender her dignity, who portioned out food for her child while going hungry herself, who met the world with her chin up even when she had nothing left. "Because I buried my brother 3 years ago," he said quietly. "Buried him and his wife and left their children orphaned because I wasn't there when they needed me. Been carrying that ever since." He met her eyes. "Maybe doing right by you and your daughter won't balance the scales. But it won't hurt." Silence stretched between them. Molly had fallen asleep again, curled against her mother's side. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called, and cattle lowed in response. 2 weeks, Lydia said finally. "I'll work to earn our keep, and then we'll go to town. Agreed?" Agreed. Caleb showed them to the spare room upstairs, his brother's room, the one he'd kept closed since returning from the war. The bed was made with clean sheets because he couldn't stand the thought of them gathering dust, even in a room no one used. The window looked east toward the sunrise. "Water's in the pitcher, chamber pot's in the corner. I'll bring up something for Molly to wear to bed. One of my old shirts should work." "Thank you." Lydia's voice was thick with emotion she was fighting to contain. "Mr. Walker, thank you." He nodded and retreated before she could see how the gratitude in her eyes affected him. Downstairs, he stood in his kitchen and wondered what he'd just committed to. 2 weeks of having people in his house. 2 weeks of conversation and questions, and the disruption of his carefully ordered solitude. 2 weeks of remembering what it felt like to be needed. Through the floorboards, he heard Lydia's voice, soft and low, as she settled Molly for the night. The sound of it, that gentle maternal murmur, was something he hadn't heard in 3 years, something he'd told himself he didn't miss. He'd been lying. Caleb stepped out onto his porch and looked at the fence line where he'd been working when they appeared. The post still needed setting, the work still needed doing, but for the first time in 3 years he found himself thinking that maybe, just maybe, there were things more important than maintaining boundaries. Maybe what he'd been building all this time wasn't protection. Maybe it was just a prison. The stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns, and somewhere in his house, a child slept safe, and a woman finally let herself rest. Caleb sat on his porch steps and listened to the night sounds of his ranch, the familiar cattle, the wind in the grass, the creak of his barn. And now, underneath it all, something new, something that sounded almost like hope. He didn't sleep well that night. Around midnight, he heard footsteps upstairs, the soft murmur of Lydia's voice soothing a child's nightmare. He lay in his own bed and stared at the ceiling, listening to that sound, the sound of life happening in rooms that had stood empty too long. When dawn came, he rose to find Lydia already in the kitchen, wearing the same patched dress but with her hair properly pinned, standing at his stove as if she belonged there. "I hope you don't mind," she said when she saw him. "I wanted to earn my keep. I found eggs in the henhouse and made breakfast." The smell of coffee and bacon filled the kitchen, scents he associated with mornings when his brother was still alive, when this house had been full of family. He'd forgotten how much he missed it. "Where's Molly?" "Still sleeping. I think she'll sleep most of the day. Her body needs it." Caleb nodded and sat at the table he usually ate at, standing up. Lydia served him eggs and bacon and fresh biscuits that she must have made before he woke, then poured coffee and stood uncertainly, as if unsure whether she was allowed to join him. "Sit down, Mrs. Hale. You worked for this same as I did." She sat, and they ate in silence for several minutes. The food was good, better than anything he'd made himself in months. Simple fare, but prepared with a care he'd almost forgotten food could have. "The henhouse needs a new latch," Lydia said finally. "The current one's about to break, and you've got a family of mice living in the feed bin." "I'll fix the latch today. Set some traps for the mice." "I noticed the garden's gone to weeds. Haven't had time for it. I could tend it, if you'd like. Molly and I could make it part of our work." Caleb looked at her. She met his gaze steadily, and he understood what she was doing, establishing her value, proving she wasn't charity, that she could earn what he was giving her. "That would be appreciated," he said. They fell into a rhythm after that. Caleb went to work on the fence line, and Lydia tackled the house with the methodical efficiency of a woman who understood how to manage a home. By evening, he returned to find laundry hanging on the line he'd forgotten existed, the kitchen floor scrubbed, windows washed, and a stew simmering on the stove that filled the house with the smell of civilization. Molly was awake, sitting on the porch with a cup of milk, watching the sunset with wide eyes. The dangerous flush had faded from her cheeks, and she smiled shyly when he nodded to her. It was just one day, just the beginning. But already, Caleb could feel something shifting in the foundations of the life he'd built on isolation. Could feel the walls he'd constructed beginning to crack. And for the first time in 3 years, he wasn't sure he wanted to repair them. The second morning brought a discovery that changed everything. Caleb was checking the water trough when he heard Lydia's sharp intake of breath from the henhouse. He dropped the bucket and was moving before conscious thought caught up, reaching the small wooden structure to find her standing motionless, staring at something in the corner. "What's wrong?" She pointed to a nest box where one of his hens sat stubbornly. "You have 17 chickens." 18. The red one hides during the day." "No, Mr. Walker. You have 17 chickens and one very clever fox who's been living in your henhouse for at least a week, judging by the feathers." Caleb moved closer and swore under his breath. She was right. The hen he'd been seeing was actually a young fox that had figured out how to slip through a gap in the back wall, hide during the day, and hunt at night. The missing eggs he'd attributed to poor laying were actually feeding a predator he'd been too distracted to notice. "I'll set a trap." "Don't." Lydia's voice was firm. "Just repair the wall. The fox is only doing what foxes do. We're the ones who made it easy." Caleb looked at her in surprise. Most women he knew would have demanded he shoot the animal immediately. "You're not worried it'll come back?" "Not if there's no way in. Besides, it's probably a mother feeding kits. Kill her, and they'll starve." She met his eyes with that same steady gaze that had caught his attention on the road. Life's hard enough without adding unnecessary death to it. He studied her for a long moment. This woman who'd walked 200 miles with nothing, who could have been bitter and hard, but instead advocated for mercy toward a creature stealing from them. "I'll fix the wall this afternoon." "I'll help. I'm good with a hammer." She was. Better than good, actually. Lydia held the boards steady while Caleb nailed them in place, her hands sure and strong despite their delicacy. They worked in companionable silence, and when the gap was sealed, she nodded with satisfaction. "There. Now we're not victims, and the fox isn't a thief, just nature back in balance." The philosophy in that simple statement stayed with Caleb long after they'd returned to their separate tasks. Nature back in balance. Was that what was happening here? Had his isolated existence been as unnatural as a fox living in a henhouse? Survival, yes, but survival in a way that violated something fundamental? That afternoon, he found Molly in the garden, crouched beside a row of struggling tomato plants. The child had been quiet since arriving, speaking only when spoken to, moving through the house like a ghost afraid to disturb anything. Now, though, she was utterly absorbed in examining a caterpillar making its way up a stem. "He's very fuzzy," she said without looking up, sensing his presence. "That's a woolly bear. They turn into moths." "Will he eat Mama's tomatoes?" "Probably." Molly considered this seriously. "Should I move him?" "That's between you and your conscience." The child's face scrunched in concentration. Finally, with infinite care, she picked up the caterpillar and carried it to the fence line, placing it on a wild sunflower growing there. "He can eat that instead. Then everyone's happy." The simple wisdom of it, the echo of her mother's philosophy about the fox, made Caleb's chest tight. He watched Molly return to the garden and resume her work, pulling weeds with the same serious concentration she'd given the caterpillar. This child who'd known hunger and fear and loss still chose kindness when given the option. "She's good with growing things," Lydia said from the porch where she'd been watching. "Her father never let her have a garden. Said it was foolish to waste water on flowers when we barely had enough for drinking. These aren't flowers, they're vegetables." "I know, but to Molly, anything that grows is beautiful. She doesn't see the difference between useful and ornamental, just between living and dead." Caleb thought about his own ranch, how he'd stopped seeing beauty in it somewhere along the way, stopped noticing the wildflowers that bloomed along the creek, the way morning light painted the mountains gold. Everything had become about function, utility, survival. When had he started seeing the world the way Lydia's dead husband had, divided between useful and wasteful, with no room for beauty in between? She can plant whatever she wants, he heard himself say. If she wants flowers, there's seed packets in the barn, left over from when my sister-in-law lived here. Lydia's expression softened. That's kind of you. It's practical. Happy children work better than sad ones. But they both knew that wasn't why he'd said it. The days developed a rhythm that felt both foreign and achingly familiar. Caleb rose at dawn to tend the cattle and horses, repair fence and buildings, manage the 100 tasks that kept a ranch running. Lydia transformed his house from a place he slept into something that resembled a home. Curtains washed and hung, floors scrubbed, meals that appeared at regular times with a consistency he'd forgotten was possible. And Molly brought life to spaces that had been silent too long. Her laughter when she found eggs in the henhouse, her serious conversations with the barn cats, the way she sang to herself while working in the garden, songs Lydia must have taught her, old ballads from Virginia about lovers and lost causes and hope that survived everything. On the fourth day, Caleb came in from the fields to find Lydia standing in his office, staring at the desk covered in 3 years of disordered papers. "I'm sorry," she said immediately. "I shouldn't have come in here. The door was open and I thought, it's fine." He'd left it open deliberately, testing whether she'd respect the boundary or assume permission. The fact that she'd entered but was now apologizing told him she understood the difference between cleaning and invading privacy. "What did you think?" "I thought that a man who keeps his fence lines so precise probably hates seeing his records in such chaos." She gestured at the scattered papers, ledgers, receipts. "I'm good with numbers. I kept my father's books before I married. If you'd like, I could organize this, make it so you can actually find things." Caleb looked at the disaster that was his bookkeeping. He'd been ignoring it for months, maybe longer. Hated the paperwork, the tedious recording of expenses and income and cattle sales. But it had to be done, and now it had become a mountain he didn't know how to climb. "You do that?" "I'd enjoy it, actually. Numbers make sense. They balance or they don't. No ambiguity." There was something in the way she said it, a longing for that clarity, that made Caleb understand what her marriage must have been like. A world of ambiguity and threat, where nothing balanced and nothing made sense. No wonder she found comfort in ledgers. "All right, but don't throw anything away without asking me first." "Of course not. It's your life in these papers. I'm just organizing it, not editing it." She said it so matter-of-factly, but the truth of it hit Caleb hard. It was his life, 3 years of it, scattered across that desk in receipts for cattle feed and medicine, records of animals bought and sold, notes about fence repairs and well maintenance. The life of a man deliberately keeping the world at arm's length, reducing everything to transactions and tasks. That evening, he found her still at the desk, papers sorted into neat stacks, ledger open, carefully recording entries in handwriting far more elegant than his own rough scrawl. She'd lit a lamp against the gathering darkness, and the warm light made the office feel different, inhabited, purposeful. "You should stop. It's late." "Just finishing this month. I want to see if the numbers match your bank statements." She didn't look up, her pen moving with practiced efficiency. "You're short by $40, did you know that? The bank recorded a payment you never made." Caleb moved closer, looking over her shoulder at the ledger where she'd noted the discrepancy. "When?" "March 15th. Says here you paid $40 on your loan, but you've got no record of making that payment, and your cash balance that day doesn't reflect the withdrawal." He frowned, trying to remember. March 15th was 3 months ago, right after the spring thaw. He'd been in town that day. He remembered that much. Had gone to the bank to discuss extending his loan, had met with Reeves. "I'm sorry?" "Thomas Reeves. He's the loan manager at the bank. I met with him that day about restructuring my debt." Caleb's jaw tightened. "He said the payment was required before he could approve the extension. I told him I hadn't planned to make a payment until April. He said it was already recorded, that I must have forgotten." Lydia looked up at him, and he saw understanding dawn in her eyes. "But you didn't forget. You never made the payment at all." "No." "Then he's stealing from you." The bluntness of it was refreshing after the careful politeness they'd maintained for days. Caleb sank into the chair across from the desk. "Can you prove it?" Your ledger proves you didn't make the payment, but proving he took the money? That would require access to the bank's records, and they're not going to let us examine those. She tapped her pen against the ledger thoughtfully. Unless you reported the discrepancy officially, force them to investigate. My word against his. And Reeves has been with that bank for 15 years. I'm just a rancher who admits he's bad with paperwork. You're a rancher whose books are now perfectly organized and show a clear pattern of accurate record keeping. Lydia's eyes had taken on a sharp gleam that reminded Caleb she'd been a teacher once, used to dealing with recalcitrant students and school board politics. If we go back through all your records and find other discrepancies, it becomes harder to dismiss as your error. We? She flushed slightly. I apologize, I'm overstepping. It's your business, not mine. No. Caleb leaned forward. I mean, you're willing to do that? Go through years of records looking for evidence that I'm being robbed? Of course I am. You gave me and Molly shelter when we had nothing. You fed us, trusted us in your home, treated us with respect when you could have turned us away or demanded. She stopped, but they both knew what she wasn't saying. If someone's stealing from you, I want to help catch them. They looked at each other across the desk, and something shifted in that moment. The transaction they'd agreed to, work for food and shelter, was becoming something else, something that looked almost like partnership. Then we'll go through everything, Caleb said. Every receipt, every ledger entry, every bank statement. If Reeves has been stealing from me, I want to know how much and for how long. Lydia nodded and turned back to the ledger, but not before Caleb saw the satisfaction in her expression. She'd found a purpose beyond simple housekeeping, a way to be useful that matched her considerable intelligence. Over the next 3 days, they worked together each evening after the ranch chores were done. Caleb would bring in the old ledgers and receipts, and Lydia would cross-reference everything against the bank statements he'd been stuffing in a drawer without examining. Molly would play quietly on the office floor, building elaborate structures from old catalogs and bits of string, while her mother hunted for mathematical discrepancies with the intensity of a hawk seeking prey. They found 4 more instances: $40 in March, $30 in January, $50 the previous November, $20 in September. $140 total, a significant sum, enough to buy 10 head of quality cattle or make 6 months of loan payments. He's clever about it, Lydia said, pointing to the pattern she'd discovered. Never the same amount, never on a regular schedule, just irregular enough that you'd assume you'd made the payments and forgotten to record them. Except I didn't forget. I couldn't afford to make extra payments. I've been barely keeping up with the required schedule. Which he knows because he has access to your loan records. Lydia sat back, her expression troubled. Mr. Walker, I think he's been doing this systematically, not just to you, to other ranchers too. Small amounts, irregular timing, targeting men who are struggling and unlikely to question the bank's records. The scope of it made Caleb's hands clench. If you're right, he could have stolen thousands. From how many people? However many he thought he could get away with robbing. That evening, Caleb rode into Cedar Ridge. The town had grown in the 3 years since he'd returned. New buildings going up on Main Street, a second hotel under construction, more people crowding the boardwalks. Growth meant money, and money meant opportunity, for honest men and for thieves like Reeves. The bank was closed, but he could see a light burning in the back office. He tied his horse and knocked on the side door, knowing Reeves often worked late. The loan manager opened the door with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Walker, this is unexpected. Is there a problem? I need to discuss some discrepancies in my account. Reeves's smile thinned slightly. Of course, come in. The office smelled like old paper and lamp oil. Reeves settled behind his desk with the confidence of a man in his own kingdom. Now, what seems to be the trouble? My records show payments recorded that I never made, 4 of them totaling $140. That's impossible. Our bookkeeping is meticulous. So is mine. Now. Caleb laid the ledger on the desk, open to the pages Lydia had marked. These are my records. I want to see yours. I'm afraid I can't show you internal bank documents without proper authorization. Then get authorization. That would require a formal complaint, an investigation. Very time-consuming, very public. Reeves leaned back in his chair. Walker, you've been under considerable stress. Managing a ranch alone, dealing with your loans. Is it possible you simply forgot recording these payments? No. Are you certain? Because making accusations against the bank, against me personally, could have serious consequences for your credit, your loans, your ability to do business in this town. The threat was delicately phrased but unmistakable. Caleb felt his jaw tighten. Are you saying if I pursue this, you'll call my loans? I'm saying that banks prefer to work with men they can trust. Men who are, Reeves paused meaningfully, stable, reliable, not given to wild accusations. They stared at each other across the desk. Caleb understood what was happening. Reeves was betting that a man struggling to keep his ranch afloat wouldn't risk everything over $140, that the threat of financial ruin would be enough to ensure silence. He was probably right. Without proof beyond Caleb's own records, it would be his word against a respected banker's. And Reeves held all the power, the loans, the credit, the connections that kept a ranch functioning. I'll need time to review my records more carefully, Caleb said finally, hating the taste of the retreat but knowing he had no choice. Not yet. Of course. Take all the time you need. Reeves stood, offering his hand. I'm sure this is just a simple misunderstanding. Caleb didn't take the hand. He collected his ledger and left, riding home through darkness that matched his mood. He'd been outmaneuvered by a thief in a suit, defeated by leverage and timing and his own vulnerability. Lydia was waiting on the porch when he arrived, wrapped in a shawl against the evening chill. One look at his face told her everything. He threatened you. Not directly, but yes. Caleb dismounted and stood beside his horse, too angry to go inside yet. He made it clear that if I pursue this, I'll lose the ranch. He'll call my loans, ruin my credit, make sure I can't do business anywhere. He can do that? He's the loan manager. He can do whatever he wants. Lydia was quiet for a long moment. Then, so we find another way. There is no other way. It's his word against mine, and he holds all the cards. No, he holds the cards he knows about. She moved down the porch steps to stand in front of him. But we know something he doesn't. What? That you have me. She said it with quiet fierceness. I worked for my father's business for 8 years before I married. I know how to read ledgers, find patterns, build cases. Give me access to other ranchers' records, men who might have the same discrepancies, and I'll give you proof so solid even Reeves can't talk his way around it. Caleb stared at her. You do that? Risk drawing his attention to you? I'm a widow with a child and no husband. I'm already vulnerable. At least this way I'd be vulnerable while doing something that matters. Her chin lifted in that way he'd come to recognize, her battle stance. Besides, men like Reeves count on people like me being too afraid to fight back. I'm tired of being afraid. Standing there in the starlight, with the weight of his ranch and his debts and his pride pressing down on him, Caleb made a decision. Not to retreat, not to accept injustice because fighting it was risky, but to trust this woman who'd appeared on his fence line barely a week ago and somehow become essential to everything. All right, he said, we'll do it your way. Lydia smiled, a real smile, fierce and bright. Then we'd better get started, because if Reeves realizes what we're doing, he'll move faster than we can prove anything. They worked late into that night, developing a plan. Lydia would approach other ranchers' wives offering to organize their household accounts as a service. Most women managed their family finances, and most would welcome help from someone with her obvious skill. Once she had access to their records, she could look for the same pattern of phantom payments. It was clever and subtle, and it gave Caleb hope for the first time since leaving Reeves's office. You're good at this, he said as they finally closed the ledgers near midnight. At what? Strategy, planning. You think like someone who's had to outsmart people before. Lydia's expression shadowed. My husband wasn't a clever man, but he was a cruel one. I learned early that direct confrontation just made things worse. But quiet resistance? That I became very good at. The admission hung between them, revealing depths to her past that Caleb had only glimpsed. He wanted to ask more, to understand what she'd survived, but something in her posture told him she'd said as much as she could for one night. You should rest, he said instead. Molly will be up early, and tomorrow we start building our case. Tomorrow? She stood, gathering the papers they'd been working with. Mr. Walker? Thank you for trusting me with this. Caleb, if we're going to be partners in taking down a thief, you should call me Caleb. She paused in the doorway, lamplight catching in her hair. Then you should call me Lydia. After she'd gone upstairs, Caleb sat alone in his office, looking at the organized ledgers, the neat stacks of evidence, the plan they'd sketched out together. A week ago, this room had been chaos, a physical manifestation of the disorder he'd been living in since the war. Now it was transformed, not just into organization, but into purpose. He'd thought he was giving Lydia and Molly shelter. Turns out they were giving him something too, something he hadn't even known he was missing, a reason to fight for something beyond mere survival. The trouble started on Sunday morning when Caleb drove Lydia and Molly into town for church. He hadn't attended services in over a year, preferring the solitude of his ranch to the social obligations of Sunday gatherings. But Lydia had mentioned quietly that Molly missed singing hymns, and Caleb found himself hitching up the wagon before he'd consciously decided to go. The looks started the moment they arrived. Caleb helped Lydia down from the wagon, then lifted Molly, and he felt the weight of every eye on the church steps. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Women leaned together, whispering behind gloved hands. Men's expressions shifted from surprise to speculation to something harder. Perhaps this wasn't a good idea, Lydia murmured, her hand tightening on Molly's shoulder. We're already here. Caleb offered his arm, a deliberate gesture that made the whispers intensify. Might as well go in. They sat in the back pew, and Caleb felt the congregation's attention like a physical presence. Reverend Matthews stumbled over his opening prayer, clearly distracted by the unexpected arrivals. Throughout the service, people turned to stare, not even bothering to hide their curiosity. After the final hymn, they were surrounded before they could reach the door. Caleb Walker, as I live and breathe. Martha Henderson bore down on them with the determination of a woman who thrived on gossip. We haven't seen you in months, and now here you are with company. Won't you introduce us? There was no polite way to refuse. Mrs. Henderson, this is Mrs. Lydia Hale and her daughter Molly. They're staying at my ranch temporarily. Temporarily? Martha's eyes gleamed. How temporary? That's our business, ma'am. Of course it is. But you must understand, people will wonder. An unmarried man and an unmarried woman living under the same roof. It raises questions. Lydia's spine straightened. Mrs. Henderson, I'm employed as Mr. Walker's housekeeper. Nothing more. Employed. Martha made the word sound sordid. And where did you come from, dear? I don't recall seeing you in town before. I'm from Virginia originally. I came west after my husband died. How convenient. A widow, all alone, finding work with a wealthy rancher. Martha's smile was sweet as poisoned honey. Tell me, are you planning to make this arrangement permanent? Caleb felt his temper rising, but before he could speak, a new voice cut through the tension. Martha, stop being cruel. Sarah Chen stepped forward, her small frame vibrating with indignation. Caleb knew Sarah slightly. She ran the general store with her husband, kept mostly to herself, faced her own share of whispers as a Chinese woman married to a white man in a town that didn't quite know what to make of them. I'm not being cruel, Martha protested. I'm simply concerned about propriety. You're concerned about having something to gossip about. Sarah turned to Lydia with a kind smile. Mrs. Hale, welcome to Cedar Ridge. I hope you'll visit my store. We have fabric that would make a lovely dress for your daughter. Thank you. Lydia's voice was thick with emotion. That's very kind. Martha huffed and moved away, already whispering to the next cluster of women. But the damage was done. As they left the church, Caleb felt the weight of judgment following them like a shadow. I'm sorry, he said once they were in the wagon, Molly between them. I should have anticipated that. You're not responsible for other people's assumptions. But Lydia's hands were trembling as she smoothed her skirt. Mama, why was that lady mean to you? Molly's voice was small. Lydia pulled her daughter close. Because some people need someone to look down on to feel better about themselves. It's not about us, sweetheart. It's about them. The ride back to the ranch was silent, and Caleb's anger burned hotter with each mile. He'd known bringing Lydia to town would raise eyebrows, but he hadn't expected such open hostility. Hadn't anticipated how vulnerable it would make her feel. That afternoon, while Molly napped and Lydia worked in the garden with an intensity that spoke of barely contained emotion, Caleb saddled his horse and rode to the Chen's store. Sarah was sweeping the front step when he arrived. "Mr. Walker, did you forget something at church?" "No, ma'am. I came to ask a favor." He dismounted, hat in hand. "Mrs. Hale needs allies in this town, people who won't judge her for trying to survive. You stood up for her today. I'm hoping you'd be willing to do it again." Sarah studied him with dark, intelligent eyes. "You care about her. She's a good woman in a bad situation. Deserves better than Martha Henderson's gossip." "That's not what I asked." Caleb met her gaze. "Yes, I care about her. And her daughter. They showed up at my fence line 2 weeks ago with nothing, and they've given my house back its soul. So yes, I care. Does that answer your question?" Sarah's expression softened. "Martha spreads poison because she's afraid of anything different, anyone who doesn't fit her narrow definition of acceptable. I know what that's like. My husband and I face it every day." "Then you understand why I'm asking." "I do. And I'll help." Sarah leaned her broom against the wall. "Tell Mrs. Hale I'm hosting a quilting circle Thursday afternoon. She should come. I'll make sure the women who attend are the kind who judge character, not circumstances." "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet. The real trouble hasn't started. Martha won't stop at whispers. She'll take this to the church board, the town council, anyone who'll listen. And if Mrs. Hale stays at your ranch, the pressure will only increase." Caleb knew she was right, but the thought of Lydia leaving, of his house returning to the empty silence it had been before, filled him with something close to panic. "What would you do? If you were me?" Sarah smiled sadly. "I'd probably make the same choice you're about to make. The hard one. The one that matters more than what people think." She picked up her broom again. "But I'd do it with my eyes open, Mr. Walker. Because once you choose to stand with someone against this town's judgment, there's no going back to safe." He rode home as the sun began its descent, Sarah's words echoing in his mind. He found Lydia still in the garden, dirt under her fingernails, hair escaping its pins, looking more alive than he'd ever seen her despite the afternoon's ugliness. "Sarah Chen invited you to a quilting circle Thursday," he said. Lydia looked up, hope flickering across her face. "She did?" "Said she'd make sure the women there were the right kind, the kind who see people, not scandals." "That was kind of her." Lydia stood, brushing dirt from her skirt. "Caleb, about this morning, maybe it would be better if Molly and I moved to town sooner rather than later, before the talk gets worse. Is that what you want?" "It's not about what I want. It's about what's practical, what won't damage your reputation or cost you business." Caleb crossed the distance between them, close enough to see the amber flecks in her gray eyes. "I asked what you want, Lydia. Not what you think you should want. Not what's practical. What do you want?" She looked at him for a long moment, and he watched her wrestle with the question, watched pride and fear and longing war across her face. "I want to stay," she said finally, so quietly he almost missed it. "I want Molly to have the garden and enough food and a place where she feels safe. I want to finish organizing your books and help you catch the man who's stealing from you. I want—" She stopped, swallowed hard. "I want to stop running." "Then stay." "It won't be simple. Martha Henderson won't stop at church whispers. She'll make this harder for both of us." "Let her. I've faced worse than gossip." "Have you?" Lydia's eyes searched his face. "Because I've learned that sometimes words cut deeper than any physical wound. They can destroy reputations, ruin lives, take everything you've built, and turn it to ash." The rawness in her voice told Caleb she was speaking from experience. "What happened to you, Lydia? In Virginia before you left?" She turned away, looking at the mountains in the distance. "My husband was well respected. A businessman, a church elder, someone everyone admired, and behind closed doors he was a monster." Her voice was flat, factual. "When he died, people said I should be grateful someone had married a schoolteacher with no prospects. His brother said the same thing when he came to claim the house. Said I should show my gratitude properly." Caleb's hands clenched. "What did you do?" "I packed everything I could carry, took Molly, and left in the middle of the night. Walked until I found a freight wagon heading west. Then another. Then another. Used the last of my money to get to North Platte, and walk the rest of the way here. She finally looked at him again. You asked what I'm running from. I'm running from people who think a woman alone is property to be claimed, from a town that would rather believe a good man's lie than an inconvenient woman's truth, from a life where I had no value beyond what men decided I was worth. The confession hung between them, and Caleb understood with sudden clarity why she'd been so insistent on working for her keep, why the idea of charity made her stiffen, why she negotiated everything as an equal exchange. She wasn't just protecting her pride. She was fighting for her fundamental right to be seen as a person rather than a possession. You're not property, he said. Not here, not ever. You say that now. But when the talk gets worse, when it starts to cost you money or standing or business, you might change your mind. I won't. You can't know that. I can. Caleb took off his hat, turning it in his hands. 3 years ago, I came home from the war to find my brother and his wife dead from typhoid. Their children had already been sent to an orphanage back east. No one thought to wait to ask if I'd take them. By the time I found out, they'd been adopted by someone else. I lost my whole family because people made assumptions about what I'd want, what I was capable of. Lydia's expression softened with understanding. I swore after that I'd never let other people's opinions dictate my choices again. I'd live on my own terms, make my own decisions, deal with the consequences myself. He met her eyes. Asking you and Molly to stay isn't charity, Lydia. It's not even kindness. It's purely selfish, because for the first time since I lost my brother, my house feels like a home instead of a tomb. And I'm not ready to give that up because Martha Henderson doesn't approve. Tears spilled down Lydia's cheeks, cutting tracks through the garden dust on her face. You mean that? Every word. She nodded, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. Then we'll stay, and we'll deal with whatever comes. What came was worse than Caleb had anticipated. On Monday, he rode into town to order supplies and found the feed store owner suddenly unable to extend him credit. On Tuesday, the smithy claimed he was too busy to repair Caleb's plow blade, even though the shop stood empty. By Wednesday, 3 ranchers who'd regularly bought cattle from him sent messages canceling their orders. Thomas Reeves's work, almost certainly. A quiet campaign to punish Caleb for questioning the bank's records, disguised as moral outrage over his living arrangement with Lydia. Thursday afternoon, Lydia took the wagon to Sarah Chen's quilting circle while Caleb stayed home with Molly. The child was teaching him to identify different plants in the garden, her small hands gentle as she showed him how to tell herbs from weeds. This is sage, she said seriously. Mama uses it for medicine when people have sore throats. And this is mint. It makes tea taste good. And this one is just a weed, but I like the way it smells, so I left it. Caleb crouched beside her, examining the plant she'd spared. It was henbit, technically invasive, but harmless. Your mama lets you keep weeds? Mama says sometimes the difference between weeds and flowers is just what people decide to call them. She says lots of things people throw away are actually useful if you know how to look at them right. The simple philosophy hit Caleb harder than it should have. How many things had he thrown away? Relationships, possibilities, hope itself, because he'd decided they were weeds rather than looking at them differently. Your mama is a very wise woman. I know. Molly smiled up at him. Are you going to marry her? The question caught Caleb completely off guard. What makes you ask that? Because you look at her the way Papa used to look at the whiskey bottle, like she's something you want but think you shouldn't have. The perception in that statement, the understanding that her father's wanting had been toxic, made Caleb's chest ache. Your mama and I are friends, Molly, that's all. Mama doesn't have friends. She has people who use her or people who judge her. Molly pulled another weed with careful precision. But you're different. You ask her what she thinks about things. You listen when she talks. You fixed the step she asked about even though you were busy. Those are just things friends do. No. Those are things people do when they care. Molly looked at him with eyes far too old for her face. Papa never cared. He just owned. But you care. That's why I think you should marry her, so we can stay forever and I can finish planting the whole garden and maybe get a kitten from the barn cat's next litter. The casual way she mapped out a future that included permanence and security and kittens made Caleb's throat tight. Marriage is complicated, Molly. Mama says grown-ups make everything complicated when it's really simple. Do you like her? Yes. Does she make you happy? Yes. Does she make the house feel less empty? Yes. Then it's simple. Molly returned to her weeding. You should tell her, before she decides we have to leave because of the mean ladies at church. Caleb sat in the garden with a 7-year-old who'd somehow become wiser than him, watching the afternoon light slant across the vegetables Lydia had coaxed from neglected soil, and wondered when exactly his carefully controlled life had spun completely out of his hands. Lydia returned from the quilting circle with a lightness in her step Caleb hadn't seen before. Sarah Chen had been true to her word. The women gathered were the ones who'd faced their own struggles, built their own lives despite opposition. A ranch wife who'd homesteaded alone for 5 years before remarrying. A widow who'd successfully taken over her husband's freight business. A school teacher who'd fought the town council for the right to teach algebra to girls. They're wonderful, Lydia said over supper, her eyes bright. Smart and strong and kind. Sarah's teaching me to quilt, and Mrs. Patterson wants me to help her daughter with reading. They're not like the women at church. They're not interested in tearing people down. Did you tell them about the bank records? Caleb asked. Lydia's expression grew serious. I mentioned that I'd been organizing household accounts and noticed some discrepancies. Mrs. Patterson said her husband had complained about the same thing, phantom payments showing up on their loan records. I offered to look at their books if she wanted. And? She's bringing them to next week's circle. Lydia's smile turned fierce. If there's a pattern across multiple ranches, we'll have proof that Reeves is systematically stealing, proof even the bank president can't ignore. That night, after Molly was asleep, Caleb and Lydia sat on the porch, as had become their habit. The stars wheeled overhead in vast profusion, and somewhere in the distance a coyote sang its loneliness to the moon. Thank you, Lydia said quietly, for letting us stay despite the trouble it's causing you. It's not trouble. Caleb, you lost 3 business deals this week. Don't pretend it doesn't matter. It matters, but not as much as... He stopped, unsure how to finish. As what? He thought about Molly's question in the garden, about the simple truth a child had seen that he'd been avoiding. As much as having something worth protecting. I spent 3 years thinking solitude was safety. Turns out, I was just hiding. Lydia turned to look at him, and in the starlight her face was luminous. From what? From caring, from needing anyone, from the risk of losing someone again. He met her eyes. You and Molly, you made me remember that living and hiding aren't the same thing. We're quite a pair, she said softly. You hiding from loss, me running from ownership. Both of us so afraid of being hurt that we almost missed each other entirely. Are we missing each other or finding each other? The question hung between them, heavy with possibility. Lydia's hand rested on the porch railing, inches from his. Caleb could have reached out, could have closed that small distance, could have transformed what they were into what they might become. But before he could move, wagon wheels sounded in the yard. They both stood as 3 riders emerged from the darkness. Caleb recognized the lead horse immediately, Thomas Reeves, flanked by 2 men Caleb didn't know. Town toughs, probably, hired muscle to add intimidation to whatever message Reeves was delivering. Walker. Reeves dismounted, his companions following suit. I hope we're not disturbing your evening. What do you want, Reeves? Just a friendly conversation about your situation. Reeves's eyes slid to Lydia. Mrs. Hale, would you mind giving us a moment? No. Caleb's voice was flat. Whatever you have to say, you can say in front of her. Reeves's expression hardened. Very well. The bank has become concerned about your loan status, Walker. Concerned about your judgment, your priorities, your ability to make sound financial decisions. My payments are current. For now. But we've noticed some irregularities in your account. Disputed charges, accusations against bank personnel, evidence of instability. Reeves pulled a paper from his coat. The board has voted to call your loan. Full payment is due in 30 days, or we'll be forced to foreclose on your property. The words hit like a physical blow. Caleb's loan was for $8,000, money he'd borrowed to buy cattle, repair buildings, survive the first years after his brother's death. Money he'd been paying back slowly, carefully, knowing he couldn't afford to default. Money he couldn't possibly raise in 30 days. You can't do this. We can, and we have. It's all legal, all documented. Well, Reeves smiled. Of course, if you were willing to resolve the situation that's causing concern, if Mrs. Hale were to find more appropriate accommodations in town, if you withdrew your baseless accusations against the bank, we might be willing to reconsider. Understanding crashed over Caleb like a wave. This wasn't about the loan. This was punishment for questioning Reeves, for threatening to expose his theft. And it was leverage. Give up Lydia and the investigation, or lose everything. I won't do that. Then you have 30 days, Walker. After that, this ranch belongs to the bank. Reeves mounted his horse. Think carefully about what matters more, your pride or your property, because you can't keep both. They rode away, leaving Caleb and Lydia standing in the darkness. Caleb felt the weight of it settling over him, the impossible choice, the carefully constructed trap, the knowledge that Reeves held all the power and knew exactly how to use it. Caleb, Lydia's voice was thick with anguish. This is my fault. I should never have come here, never suggested investigating the bank records, never. Stop. He turned to face her. This is Reeves's fault, not yours. He's the thief. He's the one who created this situation. But I'm the excuse he's using. If I left, if I went to town like he wants, he'd have no reason to call your loan. He'd find another reason. Men like Reeves always do. Caleb took her shoulders gently. And even if leaving would solve this, I wouldn't ask you to go. I told you, you and Molly staying matters more than this ranch. How can you say that? This ranch is your life, your brother's legacy, everything you've worked for. It's land and buildings. You and Molly are people, living people who need a home. He pulled her closer, feeling her trembling against him. I already lost my family once because I wasn't there when they needed me. I won't make that mistake again. Lydia looked up at him, tears streaming down her face. What are we going to do? We're going to fight. We're going to find proof that Reeves is stealing from multiple ranchers, take it to the bank president, and force them to remove him. And when that happens, this loan call will disappear like it never existed. And if we can't prove it in 30 days, then we'll figure something else out, together. She leaned into him, and Caleb wrapped his arms around her, holding her while she cried. Above them, the stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, indifferent to human struggles. But here, in this moment, with this woman in his arms and a child sleeping upstairs and a future suddenly uncertain, Caleb felt more alive than he had in years. Reeves had meant to break him. Instead, he'd given Caleb something he'd been missing since the war ended, a reason to fight for something beyond mere survival, a reason that mattered more than safety or solitude or the comfortable numbness he'd been living in. He had Lydia and Molly to protect now, and he'd burn the ranch to the ground himself before he'd let Reeves take it to use against them. They had 29 days left when Lydia came downstairs the next morning with a plan that was either brilliant or insane. Caleb was making coffee when she entered the kitchen, already dressed, her hair pinned with the precision of a woman preparing for battle. She set a stack of papers on the table, notes she'd apparently been making since before dawn. I've been thinking about what Reeves said last night, about the bank board voting to call your loan. Lydia, it's not even 6 in the morning. You should have slept. I couldn't sleep. I kept seeing the numbers, the pattern. She sat across from him, her eyes bright with the intensity he'd come to recognize when she was solving a problem. Reeves said the board voted. That means there are other people involved in this decision, people who might not know he's been stealing. So we go to them directly. Not to accuse Reeves, not yet, but to ask questions, to plant seeds of doubt. She spread her notes across the table. I've been making a list of everyone on the bank board. There are 7 members. Reeves, the bank president Hamilton, 3 local business owners, and 2 ranchers. The ranchers are our way in. Caleb poured coffee for both of them, studying her notes. You think they'd help us? I think they'd listen. Especially if we approach them not as people making accusations, but as borrowers with legitimate concerns about loan management practices. Lydia's finger traced down her list. James Patterson is one of the board members. His wife was at the quilting circle yesterday. She's the one bringing her records next week. That's a connection, but it's not proof. Not yet. But if we can get Patterson to look at his own records, see the same phantom payments we found in yours, he might start asking questions internally. And if other board members start questioning Reeves's management, they might delay the loan call until there's a proper investigation. It was clever, Caleb had to admit. Instead of confronting Reeves directly and giving him time to cover his tracks, they'd work around him, building doubt among the people who had the power to check his authority. What about Hamilton, the bank president? He's Reeves's direct supervisor, which means he either knows about the theft and is complicit, or he's been fooled the same way the borrowers were. Lydia met Caleb's eyes. We need to figure out which before we approach him, because if he's complicit, going to him tips our hand, but if he's being deceived, he's our most powerful ally. How do we figure that out? We watch, we listen, we ask careful questions. She pulled another paper from her stack. Sarah Chen mentioned yesterday that Hamilton's wife does charity work with the church. I'm going to volunteer, get close to her, learn what kind of man her husband is, whether he's someone who'd tolerate corruption or someone who'd be horrified by it. Caleb sat back, coffee cup warming his hands, and marveled at the woman across from him. 3 weeks ago, she'd collapsed at his fence line with nothing. Now she was orchestrating a campaign to take down a corrupt banker with the strategic precision of a general planning a siege. You're sure about this? Getting involved with church ladies after what happened Sunday? I'm sure about protecting what matters. Her voice was firm. You gave Molly and me a home when we had nowhere else to go. You're risking everything to let us stay. The least I can do is use what skills I have to fight back. Your skills being manipulation and espionage. My skills being observation and strategic thinking, which are much more polite ways of saying the same thing. A small smile played at her lips. I was married to a cruel man for 8 years, Caleb. I learned to read people, to understand their motivations, to find weaknesses I could use for protection. Those skills don't stop being useful just because I'm no longer in danger. The casual way she referenced her marriage, the survival skills she'd developed just to endure it, made Caleb's hands tighten around his cup. What else did you learn? Lydia looked at him for a long moment, considering the question. I learned that power isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet, patient, working from the shadows. I learned that the people everyone trusts are often the most dangerous because no one thinks to question them. And I learned that documentation is more powerful than testimony because people can dismiss a woman's word, but they can't dismiss numbers that don't add up. That's why you're so focused on the ledgers. Numbers don't lie the way people do. They don't have prejudices or assumptions. They just are. She gathered her notes into a neat stack, which is why we're going to use them to destroy Reeves before he destroys you. Over the next week, Lydia launched her campaign with the precision of a military operation. She volunteered for the church charity committee, bringing Molly to meetings and winning over skeptical women with her quiet competence and her daughter's sweet nature. She attended Sarah Chen's quilting circle and casually mentioned the bookkeeping discrepancies she'd found, watching which women reacted with recognition rather than surprise. And she cultivated a friendship with Eleanor Hamilton, the bank president's wife. A woman who, it turned out, had her own frustrations with her husband's unwillingness to question his employees. Martin trusts too easily, Eleanor confided during a church charity meeting while they sorted donated clothes. Molly was playing quietly in the corner with another child, and the other women were across the room discussing fundraising plans. He believes people are fundamentally honest. It's admirable, but it makes him vulnerable to those who aren't. Does he ever talk about the bank's operations at home? Lydia asked, keeping her tone casual as she folded a child's dress. Not usually. He says it's not appropriate dinner conversation. Eleanor hesitated, then added in a lower voice, but lately he's been troubled. Something about loan management protocols, irregularities in the filing system. He won't discuss specifics, but I can tell it's weighing on him. Lydia filed this information away, her heart beating faster. Hamilton was already noticing something wrong. They just needed to give him the push to investigate further. Meanwhile, Caleb worked a different angle. He visited James Patterson's ranch on the pretense of discussing a cattle sale and found the man in his office wrestling with his own bookkeeping. I'm telling you, Walker, nothing adds up anymore. Patterson threw his pencil down in frustration. My wife insists I've made payments I have no memory of making. The bank says I did, but I keep detailed records and they're just not there. How many payments? 3 in the last 6 months. $40, $60, $35. Not huge amounts, but enough to notice. Caleb kept his expression neutral. My housekeeper, Mrs. Hale, is very good with numbers. She's been organizing my books. If you'd like, she could take a look at yours, see if she can find the discrepancy. Your housekeeper. Patterson's tone was carefully neutral, and Caleb knew he'd heard the gossip. The widow from Virginia. Yes. People are talking, about you and her living under the same roof. Let them talk. Patterson studied him for a long moment. You know what Martha Henderson is saying? That you're being taken advantage of. That this woman showed up out of nowhere and has her hooks in you. Caleb's jaw tightened. Mrs. Hale isn't taking advantage of anyone. She works harder than any housekeeper I've ever employed, asks for nothing beyond fair compensation, and has more integrity in her little finger than Martha Henderson has in her entire body. Easy, Walker. I'm not attacking her, just telling you what's being said. Patterson leaned back in his chair. For what it's worth, my wife thinks Mrs. Hale is a remarkable woman. Came home from that quilting circle singing her praises. Said she's smart and kind and exactly the sort of person this town needs. Your wife has good judgment. She does. Which is why when she suggested I let Mrs. Hale look at our books, I'm inclined to agree. Patterson stood and gathered a stack of ledgers. Tell her she's welcome to examine everything. If she can figure out where these phantom payments are coming from, I'll be grateful. Caleb left Patterson's ranch with the ledgers and the beginning of hope. If they could prove the same pattern of theft across multiple accounts, they'd have evidence too substantial to dismiss. That evening, he found Lydia and Molly in the garden, the child teaching her mother the names of plants Caleb had taught her. The sight of them together, Molly's small hand pointing to a struggling tomato plant, Lydia's patient attention, both their faces lit by the golden light of approaching sunset, made something in Caleb's chest expand painfully. This was what he'd been fighting for without realizing it. Not just justice or his ranch, but the simple beauty of watching a mother and daughter find peace in a garden they'd planted together. I brought homework, he announced, holding up Patterson's ledgers. Lydia looked up, and her eyes lit with the fierce intelligence he'd come to love. He agreed? He did. Says his wife speaks highly of you. Mrs. Patterson is a kind woman. We've become friends. Lydia stood, brushing dirt from her hands. Molly, sweetheart, can you water the vegetables while I help Mr. Walker with some work? Can I use the big watering can? If you're careful. They left Molly to her task and spread Patterson's ledgers across the kitchen table. The late afternoon light streamed through the windows Lydia had washed until they sparkled, and Caleb made coffee while she began her examination. It took less than an hour for her to find the pattern. 3 phantom payments, exactly as Patterson had described, recorded in the bank statements but absent from his personal records. The amounts were different from Caleb's, the dates varied, but the method was identical. It's the same, Lydia said, her voice tight with contained excitement. He's stealing from Patterson the same way he stole from you. Small amounts. Irregular timing, always just plausible enough that the borrower questions their own memory before questioning the bank. That's 2 ranches, we need more. I know. I've been cultivating friendships with 3 other ranchers' wives. If I can convince them to let me examine their household accounts, we might find more victims. Caleb watched her work, watched the way her mind organized information, found patterns, built cases from scattered evidence. Where did you learn to do this? Think like this? Lydia didn't look up from the ledger. My father owned a shipping business in Richmond. When my mother died, I was 14, and he started teaching me the trade. Said if his sons had lived, they'd have inherited it, but since they didn't, I should at least understand what we had. She turned a page, cross-referencing numbers. He taught me bookkeeping, contract negotiation, how to spot when someone was cheating you. I loved it, the logic, the precision, the way numbers told stories if you knew how to read them. What happened to the business? My father died when I was 20. His partner claimed there were debts, that everything had to be sold to settle them. I was too young to fight, had no legal standing as a woman. The business went to the partner, and I was left with nothing. Her jaw tightened. 6 months later, I married a man who promised security. Turned out the only thing he secured was my prison. Caleb heard the bitterness beneath her controlled tone, understood that she was telling him about more than just lost inheritance. You think your father's partner cheated you? I know he did, the same way Reeves is cheating you and Patterson and whoever else he's stealing from. She finally looked up, and her eyes were hard. Men like that, they count on women being helpless, on borrowers being too intimidated to question authority. They build their power on other people's vulnerability. You're not helpless anymore. No. Now I'm angry, and I'm using that anger to make sure Reeves doesn't get away with what your father's partner did to me. The confession hung between them, and Caleb understood with sudden clarity that this was about more than helping him. This was Lydia reclaiming power she'd lost, fighting a battle she couldn't win before, using skills she'd been forced to hide. Every ledger she examined, every discrepancy she found, was an act of defiance against everyone who'd ever tried to make her small. We're going to win this, he said. How can you be so certain? Because we have something Reeves doesn't. What? The truth. And you. He reached across the table and covered her hand with his. You're the smartest, most capable person I've ever met. If anyone can take down a corrupt banker, it's you. Lydia's eyes filled with tears. No one's ever said that to me before. That I'm smart, that I'm capable. My husband used to say I was too clever for my own good, that I should learn to be quiet and let men handle important things. Your husband was a fool. She laughed, a sound caught between tears and genuine amusement. Yes, he was. They worked late into the night, Caleb making notes while Lydia cross-referenced numbers, both of them building the case that would either save the ranch or fail spectacularly. Molly fell asleep on the sofa, and Caleb carried her upstairs while Lydia continued working, too absorbed to notice. When he returned, he found her staring at the ledgers with an expression he couldn't quite read. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong. I just realized something. She looked up at him. 3 weeks ago, I was walking across empty country with nothing, convinced my life was over. Now I'm sitting in a warm kitchen, fighting corruption, using skills I thought I'd never get to use again. I have a purpose, a partnership, a place that feels like it might actually become home. It is home, for as long as you want it to be. What if I want it to be forever? The question caught Caleb completely off guard. They'd been dancing around the truth for weeks now, acknowledging it in small ways but never stating it directly. Now Lydia was putting it into words, making it real and unavoidable. Lydia, I know it's complicated, I know people talk, that Martha Henderson would have a fit, that it's probably too soon and too impractical. She stood, closing the distance between them. But Molly asked me yesterday if we were going to stay forever, and I realized I want to say yes, not because I need rescuing or because I'm grateful or because I have nowhere else to go, but because when I imagine my future, you're in it. This ranch is in it. This life is in it. Caleb's heart hammered against his ribs. What are you saying? I'm saying that I care about you, more than I should, probably, more than is wise given how recently we met. But I'm tired of being practical and careful and afraid. She reached up, touching his face with a gentleness that made his breath catch. I'm saying that if you asked me to stay, not as your housekeeper, but as something more, I'd say yes. He caught her hand, holding it against his cheek. Lydia, if I asked you that right now, people would say I'm taking advantage of your vulnerability, that you're agreeing out of gratitude or fear or because you have no other options. Let them say it. I know the truth. So do I. But I won't ask you to make that decision while the ranch is at risk, while you might be choosing me because you think it's your only security. He lowered her hand but didn't let go. When this is over, when we've beaten Reeves and saved the ranch, and you have real choices again, ask me then. And I promise you'll get the answer you want. Understanding dawned in her eyes, followed by something that looked like respect. You're protecting my ability to choose freely. I'm protecting your dignity, the same way you've been fighting to protect it since the moment you appeared at my fence line. He pulled her closer, wrapping his arms around her. I care about you too, Lydia, more than I thought I could care about anyone again. But I want you to choose me because you want to, not because you feel you have to. She leaned into him, and they stood that way for a long time, holding each other in the lamplight, while the case against Reeves spread across the table and Molly slept peacefully upstairs. The following week brought both progress and setbacks. Lydia secured ledgers from 2 more ranchers' wives, finding the same pattern of phantom payments in both. 5 ranches, all showing systematic theft, all managed by Thomas Reeves. The evidence was mounting into something they could take to the bank president. But the social pressure was mounting too. Martha Henderson launched a campaign to have Lydia banned from church activities, claiming her presence was a corrupting influence. The Reverend's wife defended Lydia, supported by Sarah Chen and the women from the quilting circle, creating a rift in the congregation that made Sunday services tense and uncomfortable. More ranchers canceled business with Caleb, and suppliers in town began refusing him service. The economic isolation was deliberate and effective, designed to force him into compliance with Reeves's ultimatum. On day 23, Eleanor Hamilton invited Lydia to tea. They sat in the Hamiltons' parlor, china cups balanced on delicate saucers, while Eleanor's maid served cake and disappeared into the kitchen. "I need to tell you something," Eleanor said once they were alone. "Something I probably shouldn't, but my conscience won't let me stay silent." Lydia set down her cup carefully. "What is it?" "My husband has been conducting a quiet investigation into loan management practices at the bank. He's found irregularities, payments recorded that borrowers claim they never made, patterns that suggest systematic manipulation of accounts." Eleanor leaned forward, her voice dropping. "He's planning to confront Mr. Reeves about it next week. But I thought you should know, because I suspect this involves Mr. Walker." Lydia's pulse quickened. "Why do you think that?" "Because my husband mentioned that Reeves recently called a loan on a rancher who'd been making accusations. Said it was standard procedure, but Martin was troubled by the timing." Eleanor met Lydia's eyes. "I know you're Mr. Walker's housekeeper. I know there's talk, and I know that sometimes people in positions of power use that power to hurt those who threaten them. Mrs. Hamilton, if your husband is investigating Reeves, he should know that the irregularities aren't limited to one ranch." Lydia made a decision in that moment, gambling everything on this woman's integrity. "I've been examining household accounts for several ranchers. I've found evidence of systematic theft across at least 5 properties, all managed by the same loan officer." Eleanor's eyes widened. "You have proof?" "Documentation. Ledgers showing payments borrowers never made but the bank claims they did. A pattern spanning more than a year. Would you be willing to show this to my husband?" "Yes, but it has to be done carefully. If Reeves learns we're building a case before we're ready, he could destroy evidence or manipulate records to cover his tracks." Eleanor nodded slowly. "Martin is hosting a small dinner party tomorrow night. Business associates, their wives. You and Mr. Walker should attend. It would give you a chance to speak with him privately, show him what you found." "We haven't been invited." "You will be." Eleanor stood with decision. "I'll make sure of it. And Mrs. Hale, thank you for trusting me with this. Men like Reeves think women don't notice what they do, that we're too decorative or too stupid to understand finance. It will give me great pleasure to help prove him wrong." Lydia left the Hamilton house with hope burning bright in her chest. They had an ally. More than an ally, they had the bank president's wife, a woman with access and influence and her own reasons for wanting justice. That evening, she told Caleb about the dinner party invitation that arrived an hour after she'd returned home. "It's a trap," Caleb said immediately. "It's an opportunity." "Lydia, we show up at Hamilton's dinner party with accusations against his loan manager, in front of witnesses, and Reeves will know we're coming for him. We're not making accusations. We're sharing concerns, showing documentation, letting Hamilton draw his own conclusions." She pulled out the ledgers they'd been compiling. "We have 5 ranches worth of evidence. We have a pattern that's unmistakable. And we have Hamilton's wife already convinced that something's wrong. This is our chance. Or it's Reeves's chance to destroy us publicly before we can act. Do you trust me?" The question stopped Caleb cold. He looked at her, this woman who'd appeared in his life barely a month ago and transformed everything, who'd taken his chaos and turned it into order, who'd given him purpose and hope and something that felt dangerously close to love. "Yes, I trust you." "Then trust that I know what I'm doing. I've been planning this for weeks, building relationships, gathering allies, positioning us for exactly this moment." Her eyes were fierce. "Tomorrow night, we walk into that dinner party with our heads high and our evidence solid. We show Hamilton what we've found, not as desperate borrowers, but as concerned citizens who've discovered corruption. And we let him make the choice to be the kind of man who stops it, or the kind who allows it." Caleb studied her face, saw the determination there, the strategic mind that had been mapping this campaign from the beginning. "You've been playing chess while I thought we were just trying to survive. I've been playing chess since the night Reeves threatened to call your loan. Every friendship I've cultivated, every conversation I've had, every piece of information I've gathered, it's all been leading to this." She moved closer, taking his hands. "I told you I learned to fight from the shadows. Tomorrow night, we step into the light. Together. And if it doesn't work? Then we've lost nothing we weren't already losing. But if it does work, we save your ranch, stop a thief, and prove that two people everyone underestimated can beat a system designed to keep them powerless." Caleb pulled her into his arms, holding her tight against the fear and hope warring in his chest. "I love you," he said, the words escaping before he could stop them. "I know I said I'd wait, that I wouldn't say it while you had no choices, but I can't." She kissed him, cutting off his words with a tenderness that made his knees weak. When she pulled back, her eyes were bright with tears. "I love you too. And tomorrow night we're going to win, not because we're lucky or because the world is fair, but because we're smarter and more determined than Thomas Reeves ever expected us to be." They stood together in the kitchen where they'd planned their campaign, where they'd fallen in love over ledgers and evidence and shared purpose, and Caleb understood that whatever happened tomorrow, he'd already won the thing that mattered most. He'd found someone worth fighting for, someone who fought beside him rather than behind him, someone who saw him as an equal and demanded he see her the same way. Tomorrow night would determine the fate of his ranch. But tonight, holding Lydia in his arms while Molly slept peacefully upstairs, Caleb knew he'd already found his home. The dress had belonged to Caleb's sister-in-law. Lydia discovered it that morning while searching the house for something appropriate to wear to the Hamiltons' dinner party. She'd brought nothing suitable from Virginia. All her decent clothes had been sold or left behind in her desperate flight west. The dress she wore daily was serviceable but patched, fine for housework, but inadequate for an evening where everything depended on projecting confidence and respectability. She found the trunk in the back of a closet, covered in dust but carefully packed. Inside lay dresses wrapped in muslin, a woman's life preserved in fabric and thread. Lydia lifted out a gown of deep blue silk, simple in design but elegant, the kind of dress a ranch wife might wear to important occasions, the kind of dress that said its wearer deserved to be taken seriously. "You can wear it." Lydia turned to find Caleb in the doorway, his expression unreadable. "I shouldn't. It belonged to your family." "It belonged to my sister-in-law, Mary, and she'd want it worn by someone who needed it, not locked away gathering dust." He moved closer, touching the silk with careful reverence. "She was practical like that, hated waste. Used to say keeping things unused was the same as throwing them away." "You must miss her terribly." "I miss all of them. My brother, Mary, the life this house had before the fever took them." Caleb met Lydia's eyes. "But I'm learning that honoring their memory doesn't mean preserving everything exactly as they left it. Sometimes it means letting new life fill the spaces they left behind." Lydia understood what he was really saying, that she and Molly weren't replacing his lost family, but becoming a new family, that the house could hold both grief and hope, memory and future. She took the dress from the trunk with hands that trembled slightly. "I'll take good care of it. I know you will, just like you've taken care of everything else." That afternoon, Sarah Chen arrived with Molly, who'd spent the day at the store learning to count inventory. The child burst through the door with her usual enthusiasm, chattering about the different kinds of buttons Sarah had let her organize, while Sarah herself carried a small case. "Eleanor Hamilton sent me," Sarah said, setting the case on the kitchen table. "Said you might need help preparing for tonight." Inside the case was everything Lydia would need: hairpins, a delicate necklace, gloves that looked new. Sarah's own contribution, Lydia suspected, though the older woman would never admit it. "This is too much." "This is strategy." Sarah began unpacking the items with efficient movements. You're walking into a room full of people who've been taught to judge a woman's worth by her appearance before they ever hear her speak. We're making sure they see someone they have to take seriously. For the next 2 hours, Sarah transformed Lydia from a housekeeper into something else entirely. The blue silk dress fit perfectly after minor adjustments, and Sarah styled Lydia's hair in an elegant twist that made her look sophisticated rather than severe. The necklace, simple pearls that had been Sarah's mother's, added just enough refinement without ostentation. When Lydia finally looked in the mirror, she barely recognized herself. She looked like the woman she'd been before marriage broke her down, the confident schoolteacher who'd run her father's business and believed she could do anything. There, Sarah said with satisfaction. Now they'll have to listen before they judge. Molly gasped when she saw her mother. "Mama, you look like a princess." "I look like myself," Lydia corrected gently. "The self I forgot I could be." Caleb's expression when he saw her was worth every moment of preparation. He'd dressed in his best suit, the one he wore for cattle auctions and formal occasions, but he stood frozen in the doorway as if he'd forgotten how to move. "You're staring," Lydia said, fighting a smile. "I'm memorizing, in case I never see you look this beautiful again." "You'll see it again, when we celebrate winning." They left Molly with Sarah, who promised stories and fresh cookies and an early bedtime. The child hugged them both goodbye, whispering to Caleb, "Bring Mama home safe." "I will. I promise." The ride to the Hamilton house was silent, both of them wrapped in their own thoughts. Lydia clutched the leather portfolio containing their evidence, 5 ranches' worth of ledgers, cross-referenced and annotated, proof of systematic theft that couldn't be explained away. Everything they'd worked for over the past month was in that portfolio. The Hamilton house blazed with light, carriages already lining the drive. Through the windows, Lydia could see well-dressed guests moving through elegant rooms, the kind of society gathering she hadn't attended since leaving Virginia. Her stomach tightened with nerves. "We don't have to do this," Caleb said quietly. "We could turn around right now, try another approach." "No, we're finishing this tonight." Lydia straightened her shoulders, feeling the armor of Sarah's careful preparation, the weight of Mary's dress, the strength of everything they'd built together. "We're ready." Eleanor Hamilton greeted them at the door with a warmth that surprised Lydia. "Mr. Walker, Mrs. Hale, I'm so pleased you could come. Martin is in the study with Mr. Patterson and Mr. Chen. I think you'll find the conversation quite interesting." She led them through the house, past curious glances from other guests, to a wood-paneled study where Martin Hamilton stood with James Patterson and Sarah's husband David Chen. All 3 men turned as they entered. "Walker," Hamilton extended his hand. "Thank you for coming. I understand you and Mrs. Hale have information that might be relevant to some concerns I've been investigating." "We do, sir." Caleb glanced at Lydia, who stepped forward with the portfolio. "Mr. Hamilton, over the past month, I've been organizing household accounts for several ranchers at their wives' request. In the course of that work, I discovered a pattern of discrepancies between borrowers' records and bank statements." She opened the portfolio, laying out the first ledger. "This is Mr. Walker's loan account. You'll see here, here, and here, payments recorded by the bank that Mr. Walker never made and has no record of authorizing." Hamilton leaned over the ledger, his expression growing grave as he examined the entries. "These dates match the bank's records exactly. I've seen these transactions myself." "Yes, sir. But if you compare them to Mr. Walker's personal ledger, you'll see he was recording every payment meticulously. These transactions appear nowhere in his records, and his cash balance on each date doesn't reflect the withdrawal. He could have forgotten to record them. That's what I thought initially." Lydia pulled out the second ledger. "This is Mr. Patterson's account. The same pattern. 3 payments recorded by the bank, absent from his personal records." Patterson spoke up. "I'm careful with my bookkeeping, Hamilton. Always have been. I didn't make those payments." Lydia continued, laying out ledger after ledger. "This is the Morrison Ranch, the Chen property, the Anderson spread. 5 different ranches, all showing the same pattern. Phantom payments at irregular intervals, always in amounts small enough to seem plausible as forgotten transactions, always managed by the same loan officer." "Thomas Reeves," Hamilton said quietly. "Yes, sir." Lydia pulled out the final document, a summary she'd prepared showing the total amount stolen from each ranch, the dates, the pattern over 18 months. In total, I've documented nearly $400 in fraudulent transactions. If Mr. Reeves has been doing this to 5 ranches, it's reasonable to assume he's doing it to others as well. Hamilton sank into his chair, the evidence spread before him. The silence stretched as he examined each ledger, cross-checking dates and amounts, his face growing darker with each page he turned. "This is meticulous work, Mrs. Hale, thorough and damning." He looked up at her. "Where did you learn to conduct this kind of investigation?" "My father owned a shipping business in Richmond. He trained me in bookkeeping and fraud detection before he died." "And you verified all of these entries personally?" "Every single one. I can show you my work, my cross-references, my verification process. Everything is documented." Patterson leaned forward. "Martin, you need to understand what Reeves did when Walker started asking questions. He called Walker's loan, gave him 30 days to pay $8,000 or lose his ranch. That's not standard procedure, that's retaliation." Hamilton's jaw tightened. "When did this happen?" 2 weeks ago, Caleb said, right after I questioned the phantom payments in my account. Reeves made it clear the loan call would disappear if I dropped my accusations and if Mrs. Hale found more appropriate housing in town. He tried to force you to choose between your property and your principles. Yes, sir, and he tried to use Mrs. Hale's vulnerability as a widow to pressure me into compliance. Hamilton's expression hardened into something cold and dangerous. "Gentlemen, Mrs. Hale, would you excuse me for a moment? I need to speak with my wife." He left the study, and the 4 of them waited in tense silence. Through the walls, they could hear the murmur of the dinner party continuing, oblivious to the drama unfolding in the study. "You did good work," Patterson said to Lydia. "Damn good work. Reeves won't be able to talk his way out of this." "He'll try," Chen warned. "Men like that always have explanations, justifications. He'll claim clerical errors or blame subordinates." "Not with this much documentation." Lydia touched the ledgers. "Numbers don't lie. They just are." Hamilton returned with Eleanor and, to everyone's surprise, Thomas Reeves himself. The loan manager's confident stride faltered when he saw the assembled group. The ledgers spread across the desk, the grim expressions facing him. "Martin, what's this about? Your wife said you needed to see me urgently about loan documentation." "Sit down, Thomas." Hamilton's voice was ice. "We need to discuss some discrepancies in your account management." Reeves sat, his eyes darting to the ledgers, to Lydia, to Caleb. Recognition and calculation flashed across his face in rapid succession. If this is about Walker's baseless accusations, this is about documented evidence of systematic fraud. Hamilton pulled forward the summary Lydia had prepared. 5 ranches, 18 months, $400 in phantom payments, all managed by you, all showing the same pattern of theft. That's ridiculous. If there are discrepancies, they're clerical errors. The bank handles hundreds of transactions. Then you won't mind if we conduct a full audit of every account you manage. Hamilton's tone made it clear this wasn't a request. "Starting immediately, I'll be bringing in an independent accountant from Denver, and every transaction you've recorded for the past 3 years will be examined." Reeves's composure cracked. "You can't do that. I have rights, proper procedure. You have the right to resign quietly before I bring criminal charges." Hamilton stood, towering over the seated man. "Or you can refuse, and I'll have the sheriff here within the hour. Your choice." The moment stretched taut as wire. Reeves looked at each person in the room, seeing no allies, no escape. His eyes landed on Lydia with pure hatred. "This is your doing. You came here with your sob story," manipulated Walker, "wormed your way into people's homes to spy on private records." Mrs. Hale was invited into those homes by women who trusted her skill with numbers. Eleanor Hamilton's voice cut through the vitriol. "Women you clearly assumed were too stupid or too decorative to notice when their husbands were being robbed. That was your mistake, Mr. Reeves. You forgot that women keep the household accounts and know exactly where every penny goes." Reeves's face flushed dark with fury, but he was beaten and he knew it. "I want immunity from prosecution if I resign." "You'll get nothing." Hamilton's voice was granite. "You'll resign tonight, return every penny you've stolen, and leave Cedar Ridge. If you're lucky, I won't press charges. If you're very lucky, I'll give you a week before I notify other banks in the territory about your theft. But you will never work in banking again. And if I ever see you in this town after tomorrow, I'll make sure the full weight of the law falls on you. This isn't over. Yes, Thomas, it is. Hamilton gestured to the door. Eleanor will show you out. You have until tomorrow afternoon to vacate your office and your residence. After that, the sheriff has orders to arrest you on sight. Eleanor escorted Reeves from the study, his threats fading as the door closed behind them. The remaining men sat in stunned silence for a moment before Patterson let out a long breath. Well, that was more dramatic than I expected. Hamilton turned to Lydia and Caleb. I owe you both an apology. The bank failed in its oversight, and that failure allowed Reeves to prey on honest borrowers. Mrs. Hale, your investigation did what our internal controls should have done months ago. Will there be an audit of all his accounts? Lydia asked. Starting Monday, and every penny he stole will be credited back to the affected borrowers. Hamilton pulled out the loan call notice on Caleb's ranch, and including this fraudulent action, Walker, your loan is hereby reinstated under its original terms. The call is withdrawn. The relief that washed over Caleb was so intense it made him dizzy. Thank you. Don't thank me. Thank Mrs. Hale. She's the one who built the case that saved your ranch. Hamilton smiled at Lydia. Tell me, Mrs. Hale, what are your plans now that this matter is resolved? Because the bank could use someone with your investigative skills and financial acumen. Lydia blinked in surprise. Sir? I'm serious. We need better oversight. Someone who can spot patterns our current staff misses. Someone who understands that integrity matters more than expedience. He leaned forward. I'm offering you a position, auditor and fraud investigator. Salary commensurate with your skills, which are considerable. What do you say? Lydia looked at Caleb, who nodded slightly, giving her permission to choose for herself. I'm honored, Mr. Hamilton, but I need to think about it. I have responsibilities, a daughter to consider. Of course, take all the time you need. The offer stands whenever you're ready to accept it. Hamilton gathered the ledgers. For tonight, though, let's celebrate. You've done something remarkable here. Stopped a thief, protected this community, proved that ordinary people with courage can beat a corrupt system. That deserves recognition. They rejoined the dinner party, where Eleanor had clearly spread word of what had happened. The guests' reactions ranged from shock to satisfaction to barely concealed embarrassment at their previous judgment of Lydia. Martha Henderson in particular looked stricken when Eleanor publicly praised Lydia's brilliance and integrity. Over dinner, Lydia found herself at the center of conversations rather than the periphery. Women who'd whispered about her last week now asked about her investigative techniques. Men who'd refused Caleb business last month now offered contracts and partnerships. The social tide had turned completely, and Lydia navigated it with the same strategic grace she'd used to build their case. But Caleb noticed her exhaustion beneath the polite smile, saw the way her hand trembled slightly when she lifted her wine glass. She'd held herself together through the confrontation, the revelation, the social performance. Now she was running on fumes and determination alone. We should go, he murmured during a lull in conversation. It's late, and Molly will be waiting. Lydia's gratitude was palpable. They made their farewells, endured Eleanor Hamilton's warm embrace and her husband's firm handshake, and finally escaped into the cool night air. The ride home was quiet at first, both of them processing everything that had happened. Then Lydia started laughing, great heaving laughs that shook her whole body. We did it, she gasped between laughs. We actually did it. We beat him. Caleb found himself laughing too, the tension of the past month finally releasing. You beat him. I just stood there looking serious while you eviscerated him with ledgers. We were partners, our partners. She sobered slightly. Caleb, about Hamilton's job offer. You should take it if you want it. But it would mean going into town every day, being away from the ranch, from Molly. It would mean using your considerable skills to do work that matters, work you're brilliant at. He pulled the wagon to a stop, turning to face her. Lydia, I told you before that I wanted you to have choices. This is one. You can stay at the ranch as my housekeeper, or you can take Hamilton's offer and become a bank investigator, or you can do something else entirely. Whatever you choose, Molly will be cared for, you'll have a home, and I'll support your decision. And if I choose you, not the job, not the ranch, but you? Caleb's heart hammered against his ribs. Then I'd consider myself the luckiest man in Wyoming territory. Even though people will still talk? Even though Martha Henderson will probably combust with disapproval? Let them talk. Let Martha combust. I'm done living my life according to other people's opinions. He took her hands, feeling the calluses from garden work, the strength in her fingers. I love you, Lydia Hale. I love your mind and your courage and the way you turn chaos into order. I love how you taught my house to be a home again. I love watching you with Molly, seeing the mother you are and the woman you've become despite everything life's thrown at you. I love you too. Tears streamed down her face, reflecting starlight. I love your integrity and your quiet strength and the way you see people's worth instead of their circumstances. I love that you gave me space to be whole again, to remember I'm more than someone's property or burden. Then marry me. Not because you need security or because I'm offering protection, but because we're better together than apart, because we've built something worth keeping, because I want to spend the rest of my life watching you organize ledgers and plant gardens and remake the world into something fairer. Lydia kissed him, and it tasted like victory and promise, and coming home after a long journey. When they finally pulled apart, she was smiling through her tears. Yes. Absolutely yes. They arrived back at the ranch to find Sarah waiting with Molly asleep on the sofa, the child having fought sleep as long as possible to hear about their evening. Sarah took one look at their faces and grinned. You won. We won, Lydia confirmed. Reeves is finished, the loan is reinstated, and Hamilton offered me a job as a bank investigator. Sarah's eyes widened. Are you taking it? I don't know yet, but I know I'm staying here, permanently. Lydia looked at Caleb. We're getting married. Sarah pulled them both into a fierce embrace. About time. I'll spread the word tomorrow. Let everyone know that the wedding they should have celebrated is happening instead of the scandal they wanted to gossip about. After Sarah left, Caleb carried Molly upstairs while Lydia followed, both of them moving quietly through the house that had become theirs. They tucked the child into bed, and Molly stirred just enough to mumble, Did you win, Mama? We did, sweetheart. We won. Good. Can I get a kitten now? Lydia laughed softly. Yes, you can get a kitten. And stay forever? Forever. Satisfied, Molly drifted back to sleep, secure in the knowledge that her world was finally, truly safe. Downstairs, Caleb and Lydia stood on the porch, looking out at the land that had witnessed their entire journey, from that first desperate encounter at the fence line to this moment of quiet triumph. The stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns, and somewhere in the distance, cattle settled for the night. What will you tell Hamilton about the job? Caleb asked. I'll take it. 3 days a week, maybe 4. Enough to do meaningful work, but still have time for Molly, for the garden, for life here. She leaned against him. I can be more than one thing, wife and mother and investigator, woman and professional. I don't have to choose anymore. No. You never have to choose between parts of yourself again. They stood in comfortable silence, both of them understanding that what they'd built wasn't just a case against a corrupt banker. It was a partnership based on mutual respect, a family forged from courage and choice, a home that existed not because one person rescued another, but because 2 people decided to stand together and fight for something better. 6 months later, on a crisp autumn morning when the aspen leaves had turned gold and the first snow dusted the high peaks, Caleb Walker married Lydia Hale in a small ceremony attended by Sarah Chen, the Quilting Circle women, James Patterson and his wife, Martin and Eleanor Hamilton, and half the town of Cedar Ridge. Martha Henderson did not attend, though her absence was noted with amusement rather than regret. Molly served as flower girl, scattering petals with serious concentration while a small orange kitten watched from Sarah Chen's arms. The ceremony was simple and heartfelt, with promises exchanged that spoke of partnership and respect, of choosing each other every day, of building something lasting from the ruins of what they'd survived. When Caleb kissed his bride, Molly cheered. The kitten mewed indignantly at the noise, and the assembled guests applauded the union of two people who'd proven that home wasn't something given or inherited, but something forged through courage, fairness, and refusing to accept the world's limitations. The reception lasted well into the evening, with food and music and the kind of genuine celebration that comes when a community recognizes something worth honoring. Lydia danced with her new husband under strings of lanterns, her face radiant with joy that had been earned through hardship. "Happy?" Caleb asked during a quiet moment between songs. "Deliriously. Though I never imagined this is where that day at your fence line would lead. Neither did I. I thought I was just giving you bread for your daughter. You gave me so much more than bread. You gave me dignity when I'd forgotten I deserved it. You gave me partnership when I'd only known ownership. You gave me a home when I was convinced I'd spend the rest of my life running." She touched his face gently. "You gave me back myself. You did the same for me. I was just surviving before you came, maintaining fences and keeping the world at a distance. You taught me the difference between isolation and peace, between safety and actually living." They were interrupted by Molly tugging on Caleb's jacket. "Papa, can I show you what Miss Sarah taught me? It's about the stars." "Papa." The word still caught Caleb's throat every time Molly used it, which she'd started doing naturally about a month after the engagement. Not because anyone told her to, but because in her 7-year-old wisdom, she understood that family was about choice and love rather than blood. "Show me," he said, lifting her so she could point at constellations. Watching them together, his wife and his daughter, both chosen rather than given, both proof that the best things in life couldn't be planned or controlled, but had to be trusted and earned. Caleb felt a peace he hadn't known since before the war. His ranch was secure, saved by a woman's brilliance and determination. His home was full again, alive with laughter and purpose and love. His future stretched ahead not as something to endure alone, but as something to build together. And it had all started with a woman collapsing at his fence line, refusing to beg, offering work for bread, insisting on maintaining her dignity even when she had nothing left. The fence Caleb had been repairing that day still stood, its posts straight and true. But the walls he'd built around his heart, those had come down completely, replaced with something better. Something that let people in rather than keeping them out. Something that understood home wasn't about boundaries, but about belonging. As the evening wore on and the stars wheeled overhead, and Molly finally fell asleep in Sarah Chen's arms with her kitten purring on her chest, Caleb danced with Lydia under the lantern light and understood that this, all of this, was what he'd been searching for without knowing it. Not rescue, not charity, not even love exactly, but partnership, respect, the daily choice to stand together and build something that mattered. And if that wasn't worth more than all the gold in California or all the cattle in Wyoming, then Caleb didn't know what was. They'd started with bread shared at a fence line. They'd built a legacy based on courage, fairness, and choosing each other every day. And that, Caleb thought as he pulled his wife closer while their daughter slept and their community celebrated and the future beckoned with possibilities neither of them had dared imagine, was the truest definition of home he'd ever known. Not a place, not a possession, but a promise kept, a partnership honored, a love earned through proving, day after day, choice after choice, that some things were worth fighting for, and some people were worth choosing, again and again and again, forever.